A sensation that had been hidden from people for many years is connected with the name of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, whose revelations shocked entire generations. He predicted the Great Depression, world wars, spoke of ancient Atlantis, and even hinted at discoveries in future medicine. But almost no one knows that in his mysterious readings there are lines about the most forbidden topic: what happens to the soul after cremation. These words were carefully concealed from the public, and only a few researchers preserved the records showing. Fire is capable not only of purifying, but also of crippling, and a soul torn from the body too early may become stuck between worlds. Cayce asserted precisely this, and if today we want to understand the truth, we must turn to his prophecies and figure out how to perform cremation correctly so as to help the soul and not doom it. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 in Kentucky, in a simple farming family, where life was harsh but faith and prayers held the central place. From childhood he was marked by dreaminess, deep religiosity, and a strange gift. He could see what others did not notice, and sometimes foresaw events that had not yet happened. Later a phenomenon appeared that made him famous throughout the world. Falling into a special sleep, Cayce began to speak with a voice that seemed not his own. In this trance he could describe the illnesses of people he had never seen, speak of their past lives, and even foresee future events. These sessions were called readings, and his assistants carefully recorded them. In total, during his life, he gave more than 14,000 such readings, and each was assigned a number under which it is still stored in archives. His prophecies amaze with their accuracy. In one reading, numbered 900-428, he described the approaching economic crisis, which indeed collapsed in the late 1920s when the American stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. In another, number 115211, he predicted the Second World War and named Germany and Japan as aggressors long before it became obvious. And in reading number 364-1, he spoke of Atlantis and its technologies, and decades later, strange stone formations reminiscent of ruins were found off the coast of Bimini. No wonder he was called the sleeping Nostradamus. But unlike Nostradamus, Cayce did not speak in riddles. His words were simple and concrete. The deepest theme of his revelations was the mystery of the soul and its path after death. Cayce asserted that life is not limited to one incarnation, and the soul returns to the world of people many times in order to learn and correct mistakes. In one of the readings, number 3744-2, he said, "Death is only a transition. The body ceases to be a home, but the essence of man continues, and how it continues depends on how we lived our life and how we are conducted after death." It was this, how we are conducted, that he connected with burial rites and cremation. It was here that his first hints about cremation appeared. In reading number 5756-3, he warned, "The soul does not immediately leave the physical vessel. For 3 days after death, it remains near the body, attached to memories, images, and the energy of the flesh." It is no coincidence that many religions for centuries insisted on a 3-day vigil. The soul must become aware of its departure, otherwise it can be forcibly torn from its habitual state. Imagine, the body is burned within hours after death, and the soul has not yet realized what happened. It collides with flame and feels shock. Cayce hinted that this is akin to trauma for the astral body, which generates chaos and pain. But why did such important words remain in the shadows? The fact is that in America of the early 20th century, burial in the ground was considered traditional. The country remained deeply Christian, and the church viewed cremation with suspicion. However, over time, this method of farewell became more popular, and Cayce did not want to enter into open conflict with religious authorities. His words about cremation were scattered across different readings, without a separate teaching, and therefore were almost never discussed. But attentive researchers noticed the prophet constantly emphasized the importance of time and prayer. In reading number 26275, he said, "All is energy, and the way we treat the body of the deceased affects the path of the soul. For him, death was an exam, and the farewell ritual was a hint. The soul feels the thoughts of relatives, their prayers, and even their fears. That is why he insisted, one must not stage hysterics at funerals, otherwise the soul will become confused and will not be able to depart peacefully. The best thing one can do is quietly read psalms, prayers, and words of gratitude. Then fire becomes purifying, not destructive. Thus Cayce's words lead us to a sensational discovery. Cremation is not merely a technical process, it is a magical act that influences the fate of the soul. And next we shall see what the prophet said about the element of fire, how ancient peoples understood it as a gate to the other world, and why the wrong use of this rite can become a fatal mistake, the consequences of which the soul will feel even after death. We have now approached the most mystical element, the element of fire, through which the soul enters new dimensions. Edgar Cayce called fire a bridge between worlds, and believed that it is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a living energy, capable of either helping the soul or causing its suffering. Many ancient cultures saw in fire the gates leading to another world. In India, cremation was considered a sacred duty. The flame was the manifestation of the god Agni, mediator between humans and the heavens. The Vedas say, "Agni carries the offering into the higher worlds." The soul, passing through the flame, was freed from the bonds of the flesh and continued its journey toward new birth. In Tibet, death was described as a series of states, bardos. There fire was used, but the main focus was the reading of prayers and mantras so that the soul would not lose its way in its visions. Tibetans believed that burning the body too early could cast the spirit into a world of chaos. Among the ancient slaves, cremation was also known. They believed that fire purified and opened the gates into Nav, the afterlife, but the rite was accompanied by offerings, songs, and was performed at a strictly designated time. Christianity chose another path. Here they preferred burial in the earth, considering fire a pagan custom. The Church rejected cremation for a long time, and only in the 20th century softened its stance. But as Cayce said, both Christians and pagans knew the same truth. The soul needs time to leave the body. In his readings, he often mentioned the interaction of the soul with the elements. Earth binds the body, water reflects emotions and memory, air carries breath and spirit, and fire is the energy of transformation. In reading number 28116, he said, "Fire is not only destruction, it is the force that transmutes, turning flesh into energy accessible to other dimensions." But he immediately added, "If the soul has not yet released the body, this process will be painful for it." Cayce asserted that the first 72 hours after death are the most important. The soul still clings to the body, hears, sees, and feels what happens around it. In reading number 5756-4, he said, "The soul remains near its shell until the separation is fully realized. At this time it perceives everything that happens to the body." This meant only one thing. If the body is subjected to fire immediately, the soul may experience terror, as if burning together with the flesh. For the astral level, this becomes the strongest shock, after which the soul loses orientation and begins to wander between worlds. Researchers who studied his works cited stories confirming these words. Mediums often spoke of the cries of the soul when cremation was performed too quickly. In the archives of the ARE Society, there is preserved the story of a woman whose husband was burned just a few hours after death. Later, a medium claimed that the man's spirit complained of burning pain, although his body had long since felt nothing. Cayce called such phenomena the echo of an improper rite, but he was never an opponent of fire. On the contrary, he recognized its healing power if used correctly. In reading number 26275, he said, Fire is medicine for the earth, but it must be given at the right time and in the right measure. He explained, if one waits until the soul finishes its farewell with the body, the flame helps it ascend faster into the higher spheres. In this case, cremation becomes not a tragedy, but a liberation. Every action with the body after death affects the fate of the soul. We think that the body is only biology, but for the soul it remains a home even after the last breath. In reading number 13633, Cayce emphasized, accompany the body as you would accompany the living, with love, prayer, without haste, and then the soul will depart easily. That is why in many traditions 3-day vigils, the reading of sacred texts and chants were preserved. These rites were needed not for the living but for the dead, so that the soul would not lose its way. Thus we see, fire is a dual force. It can become the road to eternity or a trap of pain. Everything depends on when and how it is applied, and it is here that the most important begins. What exactly happens to the soul after the body is finally given to the flame, and what dangers await it in the first days after death? Cayce also spoke of this in his readings, and these words are capable of shaking even the most skeptical. When the body dies, the soul does not disappear immediately. Cayce said that the first 3 days after death are the days of silence, when a person still feels a connection with the earth. Many peoples knew about this. In Christianity, this time is called the 3-day vigil. In Tibet, the passage through the bardo among the Slavs, the trizna. But for Cayce, this was not just a cultural tradition, but concrete knowledge confirmed by his readings. In one of his sessions, reading number 5756-3, he said, the soul remains near the shell until awareness of the new state comes. This process takes about 3 days. During this time, it is able to perceive the thoughts, feelings, and words of the living. That is why he strongly recommended, do not rush cremation. What happens if the body is cremated earlier? Cayce described a condition similar to shock. The soul feels as if it is being torn out of the familiar world, and in that moment it can become lost. In reading number 262-77, he explained, fire too early breaks the bonds violently. It is like throwing a child into the open sea without a boat. The soul does not die, but it may remain stuck for a long time in an intermediate state, not understanding where it is. Mystical practices from different times confirm this. In ancient Egypt, for example, bodies were embalmed to give the soul time to realize the transition. In China, there was a custom to keep the deceased in the house for several days. Only then was the rite performed. Even in the Orthodox tradition, on the 3rd day the funeral service is read, as if emphasizing, only now does the soul finally set out on its journey. Cayce told stories of souls that cried out after hasty cremation. In one reading, he described a case where the spirit of a woman, burned immediately after death, complained that her home was destroyed before she could leave. These accounts sound frightening, but they explain precisely this. Cremation is not just a technical procedure, but an energetic act. According to him, the soul consists of several levels: physical, etheric, astral, and mental. The physical dies, but the etheric and astral still linger nearby. It is they that can experience the burn from premature fire. If given time, these subtle bodies separate gently, and then cremation no longer causes pain. Interestingly, in Hinduism, cremation is carried out quickly, sometimes the very same day. But there it is always accompanied by a powerful ritual, mantras, readings, offerings. Cayce said that such rites ease the exit of the soul, but in countries where the rituals are reduced to a minimum, fire turns into a cold technical process, and this, he believed, was dangerous. He emphasized, the decisive factor is not the method of burial itself, but the state of consciousness of the relatives. In reading number 136-15, he said, the soul hears love. It sees the light of your prayers. And if it is surrounded by grief and cries, it becomes confused. If it is surrounded by silence and gratitude, it departs peacefully. Therefore, in order to cremate correctly, 3 conditions must be observed. The first, time, not less than 72 hours. The second, prayer, the reading of scripture, psalms, mantras, anything that uplifts the spirit. The third is intention, to see the deceased off with love, not with fear. Then the fire will become not an enemy, but an ally. Cayce also said that cremation can be beneficial for the earth itself. In reading number 281-24, he noted, "The earth is purified through fire. When the body returns to the element, it does not weigh down the soil, but becomes light." But again, this works only when the soul is ready. In some readings he spoke of trapped spirits. These are souls that remained near places of cremation because they had not yet realized their departure. Such entities often became the cause of ghosts. He warned, to prevent this, one must help the soul with prayers and give it time. Modern researchers from the ARE Society recalled that Cayce sometimes refused to answer questions about cremation directly if he felt that people were looking for an excuse to hurry. He said, "The truth is revealed to those who seek it with the heart, not with convenience." Thus we see that Cayce's messages about the soul after cremation can be reduced to a simple formula: do not rush, pray, and send off with love. Everything else is detail, and here arises the main question: how to cremate properly? Which steps are essential and which can be omitted? What did Cayce say about the order of actions? About this too he left clues, and it is precisely these that we will examine next. Edgar Cayce repeatedly emphasized, "It does not matter whether we choose burial in the ground or cremation. What matters is how exactly we see the soul off." He said that the earthly world is connected to the world of spirits through our thoughts, emotions, and rituals. And if we perform them consciously, we help the soul ascend higher. If not, we ourselves become the obstacle. In one of his readings, number 1391-2, Cayce noted, "Death is not the end, but a door. But doors can be different, opened by love and closed by fear." A crematorium, in his words, can be either the gate to light or the gate to confusion. For cremation to become the proper transition, he pointed out several conditions. First, time. 3 days after death is the obligatory period. During this time, the soul still touches the body, and haste may harm it. If one waits longer, the soul no longer feels the flesh and perceives fire as liberation. Second, preparation. Cayce advised surrounding the body with prayers and the reading of sacred texts. In Christianity, the Psalter in Buddhism, mantras in other cultures, their own traditions, the main thing is that the words come from the heart and are directed to the light. Third, intention. The soul senses the atmosphere around. If relatives are in despair, if the hall contains only cold formality, the soul finds it difficult to leave. But if it is seen off with gratitude and love, it departs easily. Fourth, ritual. It must not be mechanical. Even a few minutes of silence and prayer before the fire can change everything. Cayce said, prayer is a bridge that goes beyond the fire. He also added that cremation as such should not be feared. For many souls it is even a relief. The earth keeps the body, but sometimes ties it too strongly to the past. Fire, however, breaks the bonds more quickly, and if the soul is ready, it is like removing heavy clothing. But the Prophet's most important emphasis is that the soul never dies. In reading number 5755-1, he said, "You are eternal beings. You were before birth and you will be after death. Dust is only dust, but spirit is the light that will not go out." His sensational claim was that cremation does not determine the fate of the soul forever. It only influences its first steps after death. If the rite is performed incorrectly, the soul may become stuck, but even then, the prayers of the living can help it out of this state. This idea echoes the Christian practice of commemorations and the 40-day prayers, the Buddhist rituals for the dead, and even the Slavic trizna. Everywhere we see the same principle. The bond between the living and the dead remains, and the help of the relatives is important. Cayce warned, "One cannot treat death as a convenient procedure." He said that in modern society, people turn farewell into a formality, stripping it of spiritual depth. As a result, souls feel abandoned. You lose the chance to give them wings, he said, and they remain to wander in the shadows. From this comes the main conclusion. To cremate or to bury in the ground, that is a matter of culture, family, tradition. But the true choice is how we relate to the departure. If there is love, prayer, and time, the soul will leave correctly, regardless of the method. In the end, Cayce left words that sound like a testament to humanity, reading number 26275. "Do not fear death, fear forgetting the spirit. Let your hearts be the light for those who leave the flesh, and then they will never be lost." This is precisely the sensation we must hear. The truth is that death is not an end but a continuation, and that cremation can become a great liberation if we give the soul three things: time, prayer, and love. Think about it. Perhaps one day it will be you standing by the fire, seeing off a loved one. And from what is in your heart when you do this will depend where their soul goes. And when your own time comes, someone else will do the same for you. And then fire will become not an enemy but light, not an end but a door, not a flame of fear but a flame of eternity.